All right, welcome back everybody. Well, this week's going to be a ton of fun. It's a great rock guitar song. This is Cinnamon Girl by Neil Young and Crazy Horse. And they recorded this in early 1969. Just a super prolific period of songwriting there with that whole crew from the X sort of Buffalo Springfield and CSNY, like all of them together were just putting out great music in this era. Yeah, this one came out of apparently a fever. Neil Young was running a fever, and he wrote like 4 songs. This was one of them. Down by the River, I think, was another one, and a couple more. But this is just great. It's just 2 great guitar parts. And the great thing about the guitars on this tune is there's primarily 2 guitars going. Neil and I think Danny Whitten was the other guitar player and vocalist on this. But just great guitar interplay between the 2. And so we're going to break down both of those parts throughout the whole song. And you thought this was a 1-note solo, but it actually isn't. I'll show you what that's all about. Okay, so if this is the kind of thing that you like and you haven't done so yet, I invite you to jump down and click subscribe and ring the bell. The bell will let you know when I drop new content, which I do every single week. All my lessons have chapters in them, so you can jump right to the part of the lesson that you want to see and bypass what you don't. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, I appreciate that. There's thanks, just like throwing a tip in the tip jar. Or even better, you can join my Patreon page where I've got chord charts and tabs for all the lessons that I do on YouTube, just like this one. Links in the description, so check it out. Okay, so Cinnamon Girl. So first thing you need to know is how they're playing it, at least like the record, is they've got a unique tuning going on. They've got a tuning called a double drop D tuning, right? So that's where you take your 2 E strings, your 1st and your 6th string, and you drop them down a step to D. Okay, you leave all the rest the same, but you're going to drop all those both down to D, and then the rest are the same. And then we'll talk about the sort of chord shapes and the nuances going on with that. From all accounts, this sounds like a cranked Tweed Deluxe or something. Back in the day. I'll have the details of my signal chain on here. I'm actually going to utilize my Bogen little PA amp, which gets some great overdriven sound. So that's what I'm going to go with here. Yeah, so let's talk about the riff. So throughout the lesson, when I talk about these guitar parts, I'm going to talk about them in terms of what I'm going to call the Neil guitar and the Danny guitar. Neil being Neil Young, which I believe is, I'll show you the part that I think Neil is playing. And then the Danny guitar is Danny Whitten, who's the other guitar player in Crazy Horse on the session here. And he's got a little bit different tone, and he plays the riff a little bit differently. And it's the mixture of the 2 of them that really gets the great tone. But okay, so let's talk about, start with the Danny one, okay? So the Danny riff. So the Danny riff is much more straightforward, okay? And I'll run through it here one time and let's break it down. One more. Okay, so notice the phrasing on the riff. Okay, I would say the Danny part is like the classic riff, like the map of the actual riff. All right, remember we got that low D down there. So the riff is going from C bar chord or C power chord up to D, just playing those 3 strings, and then when you get down to this, it's an F chord, but we've detuned this E string down, so your chord is now very easy right there on the 3rd fret. So the riff has two parts to it, right? The first one ends in that, and the second part of the riff ends just holding on the F, right? that's the sort of phrasing of the two, right? So that's the Danny part. Now the Neil part is a lot more loose and a little more trebly on the sound side, but he's the one where there's the sort of, you get some open strings going on and chugga chugga, those things going on, right? And he's playing the top part of the chords. Where Danny was playing these, Neil is playing straight across the last 4 strings. Okay? You're getting those notes. Right? So it's like this, and notice when you're sort of when he's coming off that riff and coming down to the C note, he gets a little pull off, and you can hear that sort of D string ring out. Right, so it's a lot more loose. Right, you catching that difference where you're, you know, and he's not doing it the same every single time, but what I notice when you're listening to it, he's just way more loose and way more, there's just way more noise going on. You get the idea. So just a great compliment between those two on that sort of opening riff part. Then it moves into the verse, right? And the verse formations are, well, the chords are basically, it's a D chord, it's an A minor, or an A minor 7, I guess, if you want to leave can't tell if they're leaving that G chord open sometimes, or note open. I think it sounds like, I think it's that. Then a C. And then it's a G, but he doesn't, you know, you're not doing that because you'd be hitting an F note. So what they both do is they make this part of a G chord. And notice you're always hearing that D note ring out. Right? But classically, when you think about the chords, the chord that you're playing is a D, A minor 7, C, and G, part of a G. Right? And they're both sort of picking it, you know, they're both sort of doing some arpeggios, right? That little pickup before you go back into the riff, right? So you don't have to be super precious with that, but both those two guitars are sort of playing versions of that, very similar. And then you go back into your riff, and the only difference on this riff here, you're going to play it through, you're going to play part of the riff, and then you're going to go, well, the little part of the riff that sounds like Cinnamon Girl, right? That riff goes like this. And they're both doing it their own way, right? Danny's still doing the low chords, right? Right, that little part. And Neil, now what I notice when Neil plays this live, he doesn't do it exactly like that. He jumps down to this D phrase down here. So he goes like this. Because I think he's putting his hand in the position to do this next part down here. So instead of staying up here, instead of hitting that second one up here and then moving down, he does just subtle thing that you see him do live, and maybe he always did that, but I thought that was kind of interesting. Yeah. And then you're back to the verse again. Back to your intro. One more. And then runs through the verse again. All right, then the next part we come to is the bridge before the great one-note solo, which is technically not a one-note solo, and I will get to that. So there's the two chords that are going on here during the bridge. The chords are a C, and because you've detuned your first string, the C chord is now barred straight across, all the way across even the first string. Okay, so that's your C chord. Danny plays the C chord that way. And then the second chord we're going to come to is a G minor 7. And when you do your G minor 7, you have to fret it like this again, because you've lowered your D string here. Beautiful. And then you're going to resolve on an A before you go into your solo, which is over a verse formation. So, all right, so let's talk about Danny's part. So Danny's part on that bridge is arpeggiating this C chord. Just like that. I might not have gotten the strings exactly right on how he's arpeggiating it, but he's doing an arpeggio on those strings. And then you go to your G minor 7, and when he comes to that part, he's just going to do stabs with it. Back to your A. Okay? Neil is doing something very interesting, and this, if you're on headphones and you're listening to, one side is Neil, one side is Danny, you can clearly hear what Neil is doing is this. Right? So he's just doing this formation. So those strings are unison notes. Right? Danny was holding down the sort of chordal thing. And Neil's just doing these stabs. Down here, down 2 frets. That's still part of a G minor 7 chord. A. All right, now our solo. What's Danny doing during the solo? He's just doing an arpeggiation of basically what's happening in the verse, right? But he's clearly picking those notes out. Again. Okay, so that's Danny's part that's going behind. Now what's Neil doing on the solo? Well, Neil is just what you're thinking. He's doing this D note, but you're gonna fret the 3rd fret on the B string and play the open D string at the same time to get it just that much fuller, right? And I told you this is pretty universally known as a 1-note solo, but there's one little part that actually happens that is not a that makes it not a 1-note solo. So here is actually what he's doing. He does that little thing at the very end. Right, okay, I think the second one he holds the D, I think. But that first one, clearly you can hear that going on, which is very cool. And you know, you could totally credibly do this on one guitar too. So all that's left is this little outro, and it's not even an outro, it's just right after the solo. They just have one more sort of, one more stab at the beginning of the riff. So we're just gonna come in and you're gonna leave that D, the low D, the 6th string and the 5th string open. Right? And then Neil's guitar does that little hammer-on thing that he does at the end. You'd make a little D chord shape, and you're going to hammer on the 5th string, the 4th string, and the 3rd string, all on the 3rd fret. And hitting the those low 2 strings open. And the final note you hear is this harmonic on the 7th fret. All right, well that was Cinnamon Girl by Neil Young and Crazy Horse. And I hope you learned something new today. If this is the kind of thing that you like and you haven't done so yet, please hit subscribe, give me a like, ring the bell. The bell lets you know when I drop new content, which I do every single week. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this, and if there's another song you want me to take on and do something similar, let me know what that is too. But until next week, take care everybody.